Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight's lesson is a part of an unofficial series called Lessons in Kabbalah. From time to time, I take a concept in Kabbalah and we discuss it. It's usually related to something that is going on either in the parasha or in the book of Torah that we are studying. And tonight's lesson is called The Four Worlds, corresponding to the four levels of inspiration. So before we get into the four worlds, which is a major principle in Kabbalistic teachings and the teachings of the Holy Arizal, the writings of the Holy Arizal, that correspond to the four letters of God's name, of the Tetragrammaton, as an introduction to that, we will investigate a very interesting thing. We know that the wilderness, the midbar, the desert, where the Jewish people traveled for almost 40 years, leaving Egypt and entering the wilderness, much took place in the wilderness. The very Torah was given in the wilderness. So the wilderness is a very important place historically and conceptually is also very important, and the occurrences that occurred there are certainly very powerful, very meaningful, and very important. Especially since we find ourselves now in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. In English it's called Numbers, but in Hebrew it's called Bamidbar, in the wilderness. Much took place in the wilderness. In Parashat Yitro, it speaks about the Jewish people coming to the wilderness just prior to their receiving the Torah, and the verse reads as follows: B'chodesh hashelishi, in the third month, letzet bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, from when the Jewish people exited the land of Egypt, bayom hazeh, on this day, Ba'u midbar Sinai, they arrived, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. The third month being the Hebrew month of Sivan. Vayisu Refidim, and they journeyed from a place called Refidim. Vayavo midbar Sinai, and they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. Vayahanu bamidbar, and they encamped there. Vayahanu bamidbar, and they encamped in the wilderness. Vayihan sham Yisrael neged ahar, and the Israelites encamped there opposite the mountain. Have you noticed anything about this verse? A lot of repetition. Coming to the mount, coming to the wilderness, again repeating, coming to the wilderness. They camped there. Israelites encamped there. A lot of repetition. What's going on? Let us investigate. So in the first instance, let us identify that there are four types of encampments, or four different, twice coming and twice encamping. In these verses, there are four mentions of them coming and encamping. Let us go through it. The first one is Bayom Hazeh Ba'u Midbar Sinai. On this day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. They traveled from Refidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai. They encamped in the wilderness, and the Israelites camped there. Where's there? Where's there? The Midbar, the wilderness, opposite the mountain. It's wilderness, the wilderness, the Sinai wilderness, the Midbar Sinai. They encamped opposite Mount Sinai. So there's four times. Let us investigate. Why is there such a repetition? Why does the Torah repeat itself when every letter in the Torah is exacting? So this here alludes to a very important principle in coming close to God. After all, what are they doing here? What are they doing this now in this wilderness? In this wilderness, this part of the wilderness is Mount Sinai, is the wilderness of Sinai, where Mount Sinai is. What was Mount Sinai? The place where they received the Torah. So must be that these 4 mentions have a preparation to the receiving of the Torah. And the receiving of the Torah is a very core and essence of the Jewish nation's peoplehood. Not just leaving Egypt. The purpose of leaving Egypt was to receive the Torah, and receiving the Torah is a mandate for spirituality and fulfilling our goal and our purpose in this world. So there are prerequisites. And what are the prerequisites? The prerequisites are the forementioning of Mount Sinai. And this is what we mentioned, that they are the 4 levels of inspiration. Let's see, how does inspiration work? I'm sure that every single one of you has experienced in your lives a certain element of inspiration, or a desire to want to come close to Hashem, or a particular arousal, be it maybe on special occasions, be it maybe when a person gets married, or be it when a person has a child or a grandchild, or when a child gets married, or be it maybe on Yom Kippur, or any other festival, or times that we turn to Hashem, or times that we need Hashem and we have a spiritual arousal or a spiritual awakening. I'm sure everybody's experienced it in their own lives in different facets. This inspiration can be divided into 4 categories or 4 groups. The first inspiration is the first stage. And the first stage always is like leaving Egypt, as it says in the verse. In the 3rd month, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. So the first stage is the first spark of inspiration, where we, so to speak, have left our confines, our spiritual Egypt. We know the word Egypt in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, is the exact same letters as Metzarim, which means limitations, straits, constrained. So Egypt, the concept of Egypt, or the bondage of Egypt, is not only just a place or an occurrence that happened 3,500 years ago, but is an ongoing concept of limitations. Whether they are limitations placed upon us by society, whether they are limitations of our environment, whether they are emotional, whether they are intellectual, whether they are self-imposed, limitations that we place upon ourselves. Fear is one of the greatest limitations that we place, and quite often we place it upon ourselves. The fear to try, fear of failure, fear of relationships, fear of rejections. So there are many limitations that we place upon ourselves. So the first spark of inspiration is when there is a spiritual awakening or an exodus from our own bondage. However slight it may be, it's still an inspiration. It's still powerful, it's still meaningful, it still takes us out of our limitations. It is something that is very freeing and very refreshing. That is powerful. So that's the first spark of inspiration. Well, we're blown away by something extraordinary. Maybe God made a miracle for us. Maybe God answered our prayers. Maybe we found our inner core, a spark of our soul within ourselves that gave us strength, faith, encouragement, passion, spiritual passion. Maybe we feel a little bit unfettered and free. Many times when we reach a level of faith, we feel comforted, we feel free. When you have a trust in Hashem, you feel free from the limitations that were bogging you down till now. Quite often that inspiration is divinely initiated, what the Kabbalists called Hitaruta de Le'ela, an arousal that comes or is initiated from above. For example, the going out of Egypt. The Almighty initiated that exodus through all of the miracles that the Jewish people saw the hand of God and experienced for a lengthy period of time. The miracles just didn't happen. 10 plagues happened one after the other consecutively in 10 days. It was a matter of months, where there was one miracle and then time to absorb that miracle, and then another miracle and time to absorb that miracle, live by it, and again another and another and another, matter of months. So that's the first stage, where there's this initial inspiration, where you feel elevated and elated, and you feel spiritual, and you feel greatly motivated. A surge. But what usually happens after that? What usually happens? It is lost easily. It's not always enduring. It's not sustainable. It somehow disappears, and we feel like empty, like we're in a pit. Where did that inspiration go? Now that we're about to take the first steps and go forward, or maybe we've taken the first steps, now we have to now trek that long journey to transplant or to live by that inspiration that we had, to implement it. Bang! That inspiration is gone. And every single person experiences it, myself inclusive. Sometimes you feel so elated, so uplifted. Sometimes in your prayer, something touches you, and you feel so elated, and you take those steps, and you make decisions, and then somehow you feel you're lost, you're abandoned, you're on your own. You don't have that power, that powerful surge of inspiration is gone. Disappears. What do you do then? What do you do then for inspiration? How do you go forward? How do you move forward? How do you travel? How do you grow when that inspiration grows? That is the trick. That is the true test. Not from that initial surge of inspiration. That's lovely. That's a boost. It's like getting vitamins, getting an iron injection, and you feel great, just to give you that boost. But then after that, you have to sustain it by eating the right foods, doing the right things, and allowing for that to endure. That's the hard work. That's when the hard work takes place, and that's when it becomes significant and enduring. So the first stage is usually not enduring. You see this quite often in people who embrace Judaism, perhaps they weren't exposed to Judaism in their youth, in their early life or whatever, and then at some stage in their life they embrace Judaism, and they're what's called Hozer B'Tshuva, Hozrim B'Tshuva. They are penitents. They return back to their roots, and it's an unbelievable inspiration, and powerful, and they feel like they're flying, and then one day, bang, it disappears, either in one shot or slowly, and they look back and say, "Where's that inspiration? I used to put on tefillin with such passion. I used to pray with such movement, with such conviction. Where did it go? It's almost become monotonous. What happened?" And we begin to question, was it real? Am I real? Am I true? And this is reflected in the verse. In the 3rd month, from the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. Remember the exodus. On this day, they arrived at the wilderness of Sinai, using a past tense. They came. Using the past tense, meaning to say that they had that arousal. What brought them? What caused them to travel through that wilderness and arrive at the wilderness of Sinai? Remember, right after the splitting of the sea, this great miracle of splitting of the sea, they had a bit of a spiritual fall in the place called Rephidim. Rephidim hints to the word rafui in Hebrew means weakening. They had a spiritual weakness, a spiritual fall. Remember, they were complaining about water. Where's your faith? You just saw an unprecedented miracle of splitting of the sea. You experienced 10 plagues, 10 miracles. Where's your faith? True, you need water, but where's your faith to be able to complain to such a degree, in such a manner? So there was a spiritual weakness. But they repented. And they arrived in that manner of repentance, prepared now in the wilderness of Sinai. But it's written in a past tense, showing that they've experienced that elation, that surge. It's gone now. Now the Torah takes us to the next stage, and that's why we have the repetition, because there are 4 stages of inspiration. The next stage, what's the next stage? A repetition now. It repeats almost exactly the same thing. Also in past tense, it says as follows. On this day, they journeyed from Rephidim and arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. Anything new? The only thing new is that they traveled from Rephidim. They could have said it before, or could have even said it afterwards. Where did they come from? They came from Rephidim. But I know that they're arrived at the wilderness of Sinai. He just said that a half a verse before. Why repeat? Because at the moment that when we lose that inspiration, we have to go back. And re-arouse and re-remember and relive the truths of that original inspiration. Why did I have that inspiration? What caused me to take those baby steps forward in spirituality? To relive and to revisit those spiritual truths that moved you in the first place, that touched your heart in the first place. Yes, we all have inspirations and we all lose it. But the next stage is very important and very crucial to allow the inspiration to continue. And that is when you have no inspiration. That is that you have to relive the reason and the truths of that original inspiration. Revisit it. It's almost like I'm repeating. The Torah repeats itself. They arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. I know that. They arrived in the wilderness. They came there already. Yes, they were already there. Exactly where I was already, I'm revisiting. From where I was before the original inspiration, I'm revisiting. And I'm reminding myself the truth of spirituality, the truth of godliness, the oneness of God, the unity of God, and all those important things. Our dependence upon God, and all of these important things that moved me in the first place. The truth, the veracity of God's teachings, of our purpose, the fact that we have a soul, and it's got a purpose. That the Creator created a world and created a purpose. The world came after the purpose. There was first a purpose. Then there was a world. I remember I was invited when I was in Russia. It's almost 30 years now. 30 years ago, when I was in Russia, they found out that there was and the Russians love to speak and love to have conversations. And you turn on the television in Russia then, I don't know what it is now, but you hear people speaking for hours. Just speaking. My God, what's going on in this country? How boring. They love to speak. Their language is very expressive. On and on and on. I'm sure today they've westernized a lot, but in those days, turn on channel 1, channel 2, someone speaking about something for hours. So they heard that there's some visiting English-speaking rabbis. So I was invited to a talk. I came to talk. I thought the 10 people, 15 people who was interested in hearing. It was packed. So I decided to speak about, so they weren't necessarily interested in God per se, or they just wanted to hear someone speak English. You can speak about cartoons as far as I could have spoken about cartoons as far as they were concerned. Just speak English, we want to hear you. So I picked a topic that's relevant to everyone. Man's relationship with God and God's relationship with man. Universal. And I spoke. It seemed that they were quite engaged and impressed by what I said. They started to ask me a lot of questions. What is Judaism's approach to this philosophy and this idea and this philosophy and this philosophy? So some of them I knew a little bit about and I answered, and some of them I didn't. I asked them to explain me what is the basic tenets of that premise, that belief, or that philosophy, that idea. And based upon that, I would then say what Judaism approach would be to that idea. Do we reject it? Do we embrace it? Do we have some parts of this in our religion, etc.? And then all of a sudden I stopped. And I said, truth does not need a crutch. When you find truth, you don't need to exclude all other falsehoods. When you find truth and when you know that something is true, you don't need to investigate everything else and exclude and then come to the truth by default. No, truth is truth. It doesn't need any default. It doesn't need any crutches. It stands on its own. Like the very letters in Hebrew, if you were to make the letters in Hebrew, print them three-dimensional, they will stand on their own because they both, every letter of the three letters of emet, of truth, stand on its own. Each one has two legs. Sheker, for example, all comes to a point. The shin comes to a point. The kuf comes to one leg. The resh comes to one leg. It doesn't stand because falsehoods do not endure. But truth does. And when you find truth, it endures. So I explained to them, I don't need to know all of the philosophies of the world. I don't need to exclude all of the philosophies of the world when I feel that I've encountered, and certainly I believe that Judaism and that God's Torah that was revealed universally. All religion respect the Bible and respect the Torah. So they could relate to that is God's truth. So you have to revisit those truths. You have to remind yourself of those truths. You have to go back to basics and remind yourself what made you seek out Judaism, what made you seek out and search out spirituality and godliness. Those divine, eternal truths. They were your impetus. They were a catalyst to your original inspiration. And even if the inspiration came from God, because God had mercy upon us, and He showed us the way, and He parted the heavens for us, for a small glimpse, and we saw and we recognized the truth, and we felt that it overwhelmed us. God's light enveloped us. You knew it then. You recognized it for what it was. Now replicated when you are in the darkness. It's like a lightning bolt. You're in a very dark. I don't know whether you've ever been in an open field. An open field on a dark night. It's pitch black. Can't see anything. Because it's so black you can barely see where you're going. And all of a sudden there is a lightning bolt. Or let's say the clouds part for a moment and the moon shines its light. You suddenly get a glimpse and you know your bearing, you know where you are. Oh, here I am. I'm now traveling north or south or west. I got to go east. So I turn around. And for that moment, that glimpse that the moon or the lightning bolt gave you, you now get your bearings and you know where to go. And even if the cloud recovers the moon or that lightning bolt disappears, you've got your bearings. Now travel east. You've recognized where east is. You know where you're coming from. You know where you need to go. All you need to do is endure and go forward. Remind yourself when the heavens parted. Remind yourself when the clouds moved. Remind yourself when there was a lightning bulb of that light, of what you saw, and that will help you move forward. That is the next stage of inspiration. And that is an extremely, extremely important level of inspiration. Because you need to relive. You need to re-remind yourself. And that's why the Torah repeats itself. Now the Torah doesn't repeat itself. It goes now to a new dimension. Now the Torah goes to the third dimension. And what's the third dimension? The third dimension, as it says in the verse, Vayahanu bamidbar, and they encamped in the wilderness, in the desert. They encamped. What's this they encamped? Vayahanu. They settled. They settled. When you encamp, you camp, you sit, you rest, you relax, you're in camp. In Kabbalistic terminology, that idea means when you assimilate a spiritual revelation, when you actually you settle something within yourself. You've grown so accustomed to it that it's settled within you. You know, like jelly, like pudding. You know, you got to settle it. You got to let it sit. You got to let it camp. You got to let it settle for it to take the shape of the mold. You're continually moving it and whatever. Things have to settle. Things have to sit. Quite often in the Beit Din, when we have candidates for conversion, and always candidates, not always, but often candidates for conversion are very eager, and they want to already convert already because they want to be able to practice Judaism. They want to get on with their lives. I tell them, you need a little bit of time for the jelly to mold and to settle. You need it to sit with you in order for it to become absorbed in your bones and in your beings and in your head. You may know all the laws. You're very eager. You're very sincere. You've got to let it settle. That's called, in Hebrew, behitiyashvut. It has to settle. And that's the next stage of inspiration. It's a very important level of inspiration. It is a level where we begin to internalize things. We internalize. And that's called vayahanu. They settled, they encamped. So now they were traveled, they were moving from one place, they were moving from Egypt, they were leaving behind all of the negativity, all of the limitations, they were traveling towards a journey. Now they reach there, you've got to let it settle. You've got to assimilate that inspiration. We got to incorporate it in my being, in my psyche, in my heart, in my emotion. That's like when you ponder something a lot. When you meditate upon something and then you try and ingrain it within you. It's like they say that habit is second nature. Second nature is habit, something like that. Now in Hebrew it's called hergel na'aseh teva sheni. When you do something habitually, it becomes second nature to you. So now that original inspiration that you had that was so sublime and great and just disappeared, and now you've recreated it and reaffirmed those truths, now you're causing it to settle and become a settled part of you. Much more mature. So too, even the Beit Din, sometimes with converts, they know it, they're ready, they think they're ready, but sometimes that extra 2, 3, 4 months, all of a sudden, after that, they become so mature that they themselves acknowledge and they say, you know what? You're right. It's a totally different, I'm a totally different being. I'm a totally different person. My Judaism has matured to such a degree. That's that settling part that we all need. We need that as well, that settling part, to allow it to become assimilated to the core. And that comes with consistency, being consistent, going over, doing it again, and rethinking, and taking an idea or that concept, and meditating upon it again and again until it becomes one, assimilated within you. So that's vayahanu bamidbar. So notice now we have the 2 repetitions of coming. In the past tense, they came to the wilderness. Now we have, they encamped, they settled, they rested. Now we have another repetition. Again, using they encamped or they settled. So we have the first 2 repetitions. Now we have a strengthening. We have the second one strengthens the first, allows an endurance to the first inspiration, the second one, right? And therefore the same expression is used. Now we have the same thing. We have that 3rd level. The 4th augments the 3rd level. And thus, again, a repetition of the first word, but a little different, which we'll soon see in a minute. So whereas the 3rd is the settling, the consistency, internalizing, the 4th comes to augment and to reinforce that to the greatest of degree, and that is the 4th and highest level of inspiration. So let's get to it in the verse, and then we'll see how it applies to our lives, because it applied to them then when they arrived to Mount Sinai, the wilderness of Sinai, and the Mount Sinai, and it surely applies to every single one of us For our souls were all present at the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So therefore our souls too go through these journeys and must always replicate these 4 levels of inspiration. Let's now check the 4th level of inspiration. The 4th level of inspiration says, Vayihan Sham Yisrael neged Ahar. And the Israelites encamped there opposite the mountain. What was the word that we used before? Vayahanu. They encamped. Now we added a word, Yisrael. Yisrael being the name of the Jewish people. We had it in the first. We didn't have it in the second and the third. And now it's come back. Where we had Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Now no longer the children, we're not just the children of Israel. We are Israel itself. We are on the 4th level of inspiration. We are no longer, we've matured. It's like a baby. Bnei Israel, we're a baby. We're born, we just left Egypt. Now we're no longer Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. We are Israel. We have matured to the level of Israel. Like a child grows up and has its independence. It's able to think for itself, make the right decision on their own. But there's a change of a word here which is crucial. Vayihan, not vayahanu. In English it's hard to translate because we don't have in one word or one root word plural and singular. But we do have it in Hebrew. And that is, it's almost like it's saying, He the Israelites camped. Vayihan is a singular expression, not they camped. It's almost like saying he, i.e. a unified force camped, not they as a multitude of people coming together and they encamped. Rather now it uses the singular expression Vayihan Sham Yisrael. The Jewish people, he encamped. Or it, the group, a singular unit. Rashi picks up on this straight away and he says, Ki ish ehad belev ehad, like one man, with one heart, with one focus, with one purpose, with one vision. In other words, yes, they were a nation of Israel, a conglomerate of people who were all part of the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, marching out of Egypt as a nation, as a people, with a purpose to receive the Torah and to enter the land of Israel, yes. But their unity wasn't that singular yet. The 4th level of inspiration is when you become absolutely unified with yourself, with God, with people around you. There is no division between you and other people. Because really, the Jewish nation are compared to a single unit, to a single body. Where the left hand and the right hand are all a part of one unit, one body. It's one being, it's one entity. The right hand, the left hand, they all complement each other. The mind, the heart, they all work together to make us all function properly. So just as a singular, harmonious body that works together in unison works properly, if God forbid part of it is not working properly, it diminishes the whole, the rest of the body. Person has a very bad headache or migraine or something is going on, it affects the whole body. If a person is paining in the shoulder, for example, then it weakens the whole body. He's not able to lift with the left. The right has to compensate. You can only lift one thing at a time. And the pain itself causes weakness to the whole body. You become much more tired. And so on and so forth. You can well imagine and understand. Vayihan, the singular expression, expresses this very idea. We know that spirituality or the ascent towards spirituality, it's a battle, it's a struggle to want to do the right thing and then to actually implement it and do the right thing. There'll always be friction. There'll always be resistance. That resistance itself is very important, it's very powerful in molding who we are, what we are. But the ultimate goal is to get to a stage where there is no longer any resistance. The harmony is so great, the unity is so great, there's no longer, you don't feel any resistance. You're harmony, you're at one with your environment. You're at one with God, you're at one with His Torah. There's no inner conflicts and challenges. You are at peace. Your faith in God is so powerful that you are one with God. There's a harmony. And you begin to use the energy that God directs towards you to fulfilling your goals. I remember an instructor in martial arts one time was teaching me how to deflect the energy. Don't resist it, because it's powerful. Someone coming at you like a ton of bricks, take his energy and deflect it. So as opposed to just blocking, so someone comes to you like with a punch, for example, so you don't block it because that can knock you out. It's hard, you get a jolt. So you move out of the way and you take their hand and you deflect it. And you use their very energy to get to where you need to go, what you need to do, and that is to deflect the enemy or that power or that force. You don't feel the resistance anymore. You somehow deflect. It's almost like like a wave there. It's a harmony, peace. Because ordinarily there is resistance. You want to go and pray, it's cold outside, there's resistance. You want to go and pray with intensity, with force, it's resistance. You've got things troubling you, plaguing you, things at work, things at this, things at that. Things are bothering you. So there's a lot of resistance. You want to take on a mitzvah, there's resistance. No, don't do it. It's going to this, it's going to that. It's a commitment. You don't want commitments. You don't like commitments. And you're going to restrict yourself, but you don't know how it invigorates you and how much it frees you. But you only know that later. So when you reach that fourth level of inspiration, that's when the resistance is, you don't feel the resistance anymore. There's no conflict, there's no struggle, there's no inner turmoil. You are one. That's what uses the expression Bayihan, the singular, harmony with God. You've reached the level of nullification. There's no ego anymore. Where there's ego, there's resistance. I have to nullify my ego to accept God's presence. It's work, it's job. Because I take place, I take space. I have desires, I have dreams, I have aspirations, I have wants. I have lusts, I have passions. Oh, that's not in accordance with the Torah. Now I've got an inner turmoil and struggle. Some conflict there. It's a battle. I have to wage a battle. I have to explain to myself why it's important. I have to revisit those initial truths. I've got to go through it all. And it's conflict, and it takes time and energy, toil. But then finally, the end, the final level of inspiration is where there's harmony and peace. We become one. And your ego is lost to the core and essence of all life, God Himself, which is your life, which is your energy. Godliness is your energy. You become one with that. You no longer resist that. And you let yourself go. You let yourself flow. You let yourself be included in God's light and God's absolute unity. You don't fight for your place, for God is the place of everything. You don't fight for your place. You're not challenging, so to speak, God for your place to assert yourself and your desire, what you want. You become at harmony, at peace, at one, really with yourself, because godliness is the energy that enlivens you, Ki hu hayecha, for He is your life. God is your life. So the resistance is just, there's not that much resistance. We've done away with it. It's peace and harmony, and that is the expression that is used of Vayihan and Yisrael, not Bnei Yisrael, Yisrael, not the children of Israel, because we've reached a level of spiritual maturity. I just want to, and then and only then, and after that, when they reached that level, then was the Torah given. I just want to go back a little bit, just to accentuate the importance of the wilderness. Why indeed did God give the Torah in the wilderness? We spoke about it in different times in sermons and lectures, but just to remind ourselves, and for those who didn't hear. The wilderness is a very important place. On the one hand, it's a public domain. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's a big difference in halakha. And spiritually, a public domain and a private domain. A public domain, you don't own it, and I don't own it. Anything goes in a public domain. In a private domain, I've got control. My house, I've got control what happens, what comes in, who comes in. I've got control what music there exists there, what things I want to see there or not. I've got control. In a public arena, in a public domain, there is no control. And the Kabbalists call it Rishuta di Peruda, the place, the domain of disunity. That's where godliness needs to thrive. Not just in your home, not just in your synagogues, not just in your temples, in the domain of disunity. That is where we have to bring in God's unity. And when they reach that level of God's unity, the fourth level of inspiration, they got it. They finally got it, and then the Torah was given. Then the Torah was revealed. That's A. B, the wilderness is an ownerless place. The Torah, the sages say, the Torah is only given to a person who becomes ownerless. What does it mean, ownerless? It means he doesn't take up place. He doesn't think that he's the owner of the place. He doesn't assert himself. That's the fourth level. So we see that the wilderness is a very important prerequisite where godliness needs to thrive, must thrive in this barren, desolate, harsh environment. Godliness too can thrive, must thrive, because every one of us has this desolate place within our lives, sometimes within our hearts, sometimes within our minds, sometimes different periods in our lives, where we must bring in godliness and God's unity to this desolate place. And in order to be able to achieve that unity with God, we have to become one with God. We have to become ownerless. Where we don't seek to continually assert ourselves and our ego and my wants and our I, because the I challenges the I of myself will always be in conflict with I am the Lord your God. There's only one I. There's only one true existence, as Maimonides writes in the beginning of his books, of his halachic works. The essence of all existence is godliness. Yisod ha-yisodot, the foundation of all foundations. Leda sheyesh hamatzui rishon, there is a primordial, enduring being. That is godliness. The essence of all life, the essence of all power. This, ladies and gentlemen, corresponds to the four worlds. Although we don't have much time to speak about the four worlds, but we have on different occasions. So I will remind you, one of the most important teachings that we find in the writings of the Arizal is the order of descent, which is called Seder Hishtalshelut, the order of the light or the energy or the life force of God as it contracts and becomes hidden and filtered in order for there to be a world by which we feel seemingly our own independence, our own space and assertiveness. And then serve God out of total and true free choice. That was the desire of God. In order for that to happen, there was a modules had to be put in place. Because from extreme spiritual light cannot be physical entities. You will become nullified and blinded before the spiritual light, no matter how much it may be, filters may be placed upon it, because light is light. But ultimately, an intricate ladder of God's spirituality descended from level to level, finally creating what's called vessels or letters. When I'm speaking to you, I'm using letters. These letters are garments which enclose the message that my mind, my brain gives off, which is the message and the teachings that my mind wants to teach you, which comes from the power or the engine behind the mind, which is the soul. They are called garments, vessels, letters. So we use letters all the time, or garments or vessels. And they contain light, but they limit the light. This word, the word that I just used, word, is a word. It's not this word and not another word. And it's expressing to you and telling you one concept or not the other. Were the light to become down to this, to be revealed in an unfiltered manner, there could not be this limitation, and thus no communication, and thus no intimacy with God without that filtering system. And without getting too involved in it, they are predominantly four. And they correspond to the four letters of God's name: Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And although that they are levels that precede the four worlds, but the essence of all levels that preceded the four worlds were created for the four worlds, that there should be those four worlds that express the four concepts that are embedded in the four letters of God's name. And those that were in the Shi'ur 3-4 weeks ago, where we discussed the 10 emanations, those four worlds, each one of them contain the 10 emanations, and each one of the letters of God's name expresses a different concept of the 10 emanations. 10 being the intellectual aspects and the emotional aspects, or types of revelation that would be similar to our intellectual aspect, something that is more intimate to me, or my emotional one, something that is more intimate with you, with something that is outside of me. And you remember the 10 emanations: Chokhmah, Binah, Da'at, Hesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yisod, Malchut. And they are expressed in the four letters of God's name. The first letter, Yud, represents Chokhmah, God's wisdom, the initial spark, the initial revelation. The next letter is Hey, expanded, is Binah. It means understanding, expanding that initial spark of wisdom. Then the next one is the letter Vav, which is the 6 emotions, drawing it down to lower worlds. My emotions coming forward. And the last one is Hey, which is Malchut, which is speech, expressing my emotions, expressing my thoughts, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, expressing it out. And those four letters combine together all the 10 emanations. In each one of those letters, or in each one of the 10, exists the other 10, but in a much more subtle manner. There's always the more predominant ingredient of each one, which means that each one contains all the other, because there has to be harmony, as we've explained in a different time. We don't have the time to explain it now. I just want to bring out the correlation and how it joins with the 4 levels of inspiration. Now, so the Kabbalists teach us that there are generally 4 worlds which allowed for this world to be born. And that is this world, the world of Asiyah, the world of action. Then there's the world of Yetzirah, which is the world of speech, or the world of formation. Then there's a world of, and that corresponds to this, so the first world, our world, the world of Asiyah, is the last letter of God's name, something a bit more tangible. Then the next level, the world of Yetzirah, is the Vav, the letter Vav, which is the 6 emotions, and they are expressed through speech, of course. But speech is a bit more connected more to the world of action, because that is something that is a bit more tangible. There's the spiritual world of action, the physical world of action. In the spiritual world of action, that's expressed more through speech. So the higher world is the world of emotions. The higher world than that, the world of Beriah, is the letter Hey, the first letter Hey, which corresponds to the world of Beriah, which is Binah, which is understanding, contemplation. It's a deeper world, it's a higher world. It's more spiritual. And the highest world that relates to those 4 rungs is the world of Atzilut, the world of emanation, where spirituality reigns supreme, and there are no divisions between the vessels and the light. The vessels and the light are one, and the harmony and the unity that exists is absolute. And they correspond to the 4 levels, as we mentioned before. Initial inspiration, in other words, freeing yourself from the materialism of this world. And by the way, if you remember the vision of Jacob, which was really, that set the tone for him going and getting married and having children and bringing birth to the nation of Israel, that ladder had 4 rungs that correspond to those 4 levels, the 4 letters of God's name. Climbing, freeing ourselves from the materialism of this world, exodus of Egypt, and slowly climbing up and assimilating and becoming at one, until we reach the highest level, the world of Atzilut, which is Etzel. The word Atzilut, the root of that is Etzel. Etzel means right next to. It's very spiritual. It's almost like saying that world is the most closest to godliness, so to speak. Again, in the realm of worlds, there are higher levels that I don't want to speak about right now. But in the realm of worlds, there are generally 4, and that is the highest of the realm of worlds. And that is the realm where there was unity. Remember we said Vayihan Sham, where the Jewish people encamped there as one. That corresponds to the highest world, the world of Atzilut, the world of emanations, where there is no entity, so to speak. The vessels and the light are one. Because usually in lower worlds, the vessels slowly overpower the light. They are more predominant. In the world of Atzilut, the light and the vessels are one. Their harmony is perfect. When you go down a level, it becomes almost like that the divisions become much more stark between light and vessels or garments or letters. The letters become much more, so to speak, tangible. The ideas become much more tangible, much more relative to a material world. The world of Atzilut is still extremely spiritual. The concepts there are all spiritually unified with God. Until it gets to this physical world. And those who attended the Shiurim on prayer will remember that prayer works exactly like that. The ladder of prayer. The Talmud says that the dream of Jacob, that ladder represents the ladder of prayer or ascent, of climbing up. As we pray to God, we move from one level to another level. We move from the beginning of the prayers and the middle of the prayers and the higher part of that until we reach the level of the Amidah, which we will discuss in our lectures. Amidah, where we stand still and we don't vocalize our words. We don't pray out loud. In lower levels, we are permitted and even encouraged to pray out loud. But when we pray the Amidah, we pray it silently because we are standing in front of the king. We've entered this, so to speak, the palace of the king, where we become totally one with the king and nullified before the king. And that's why we bow in the Amidah. Total submission. We are totally submissive to God. So we've run out of time. I wanted to develop that a little bit more, but we have discussed the four worlds on previous occasions. It is a fundamental concept in Kabbalah. Maybe another time I'll speak about it more at length, but I wanted to show you how they relate to the Jewish people moving from Exodus towards the giving of the Torah, and how they moved from one level of inspiration to yet another high level, to another high level, to the highest level, where they became one and harmonious with God. And that corresponds to the highest letter of God's name, the Yud, which is the point of everything, the existence, the essence of everything. Every letter, if you remember when we spoke about the 10 emanations, every letter starts from the Yud. In Hebrew, every letter starts from that dot of ink. The Yud is like a dot, right? Every letter starts with a dot, right? You got a dot of ink and then you draw it down, or you go that way, you go this way, you go that way. In other words, every letter starts from that initial seminal inspiration of God's wisdom, the Yud, the highest. It's the core and essence of all. We just have to build ourselves to get there. And that reflects the four levels of inspiration corresponding to the four worlds, where we slowly climb up. What's the purpose of these four worlds? What's the purpose of this ladder? Why didn't God just make a world and bang just like that? Because we would never be able to climb up. It's like throwing you down in a very steep place and taking away the ladder. I need a ladder to climb up. I can't. As a physical entity, I need a ladder. So God slowly ascended to this world, allowing me the ability to descended to this world, allowing me the ability to ascend the worlds. For if the barrier was so wide, I would never be able to relate to God and never be able to have an intimate relationship with God. So thus God allowed for the level of descent, slowly, level by level, rung by rung, allowing me the opportunity to climb up rung by rung, level by level, from the other way around. And that's how the inspiration works as well. We move from one level of inspiration to another level, but we dare not stop in the middle, ladies and gentlemen. We dare not stop in the middle, for all the rungs are unified and important. One is connected and intertwined with the other one. We have to move from one to the other. It's like starting our prayers and stopping in the middle and having a phone conversation. You lost your whole in going to the kitchen and making yourself a coffee and whatever it is, and you started beautiful, you had an inspiration, you put on your tefillin, or your lady just started to pray, whatever the case may be, and you allowed yourself the distraction because the inspiration went, I don't feel that spirituality. So you go and you take the phone call in the end, you have that coffee, and you can't stop in the middle. You got to continue. You got to continue it through, follow it through, be consistent. And then you will finally reach that level, that sublime level of unity and harmony and peace, where there is no conflict. We'll stop here. Any questions?